Hi, my name is Steve Rahi. I am a premier field engineer specializing in management technologies. Today's discussion is focused on modern management with Intune, specifically enrollments. We're in the middle of a series focused specifically on enrollment, and today that focus will be on specifically Windows devices. Here's a bit of our agenda for the session. Just want to talk through from a Windows perspective, supported platforms, some of the requirements that are involved, go through the 4 enrollment options that are available for Windows devices, kind of turn the page from there after we talk about enrollment, and kind of ask the question, okay, now what? We've got the device enrolled and so forth. Talk about the company portal in relationship to the enrollment process, and finally wrap up with a bit about troubleshooting, and again, specifically the enrollment process on Windows devices. So in terms of supported platforms and requirements, so just easily found information that you can get on the web that I listed out here, right? So in the supported platforms, yes, Windows 8.1 is supported, phone, RT, the PC. Windows 10 is really going to be our focus for this discussion, since it is the current operating system, and we pretty much support all flavors of Windows 10 for enrollment in Intune. There are some requirements. So first, you need to have an MDM management solution. In our case, that will be Intune. And then besides that, you do need Azure AD. Now that's what is a little bit interesting, right? Because certainly with today's iteration of Intune, it's obvious that Azure AD is a requirement. It wasn't always so. When Intune was first introduced, you had basically a standalone console that you never even had to go into Azure to be able to see Intune. That's not the case today, right? But because it was a standalone console, it kind of created a potential thought that Azure AD was not linked to Intune, or to say it better, Intune was not linked to Azure AD, and that was untrue. In fact, even in the initial release of Intune, there was a need in most cases to synchronize user identity between on-prem Active Directory and Intune. And I know for myself, whenever I first was looking into this, I asked the question, well, where is this user detail going, right? Is it housed in Intune? Is it housed in another location, right? Is there a play with Azure AD and Intune? And really started trying to understand that myself. And since the very beginning, really, Intune has had a dependency on Azure AD. Another way to say that is, even if you don't realize that you have Azure Active Directory, you did have Azure Active Directory if you have an Intune tenant. Another way to say that is, even if you don't have an interest in managing Azure AD, but you do have an interest in Intune, you will still have Azure AD. And so that's why I kind of belabor the point here. Is it truly required for you to manage Azure AD and put all the different pieces in Azure AD you might want to? Strictly, no, but it absolutely is a requirement, right? And practically, yes. I mean, every Intune environment really does need to be configuring certain options that are in Azure AD. Anyway, belabored that point enough, but hopefully get the idea. You do need a local administrator account, right? Now, this is specifically for manual enrollment type scenarios. The account that you're going to use for those manual enrollments will need to be an admin account, right? Now, under optional, strongly recommended, Azure AD P1 or P3. So this is needed for scenarios that we'll get into, such as Autopilot, right? Synchronizing your users between on-prem AD and Azure AD. Strictly not a requirement, but practically a requirement, right? So this gets into the whole discussion about, do you manage the user? Do you manage the device? You know, there's other pieces that we could pull into this category, such as the device enrollment manager accounts, and on and on we can go. Really not going to get into the detail of that here. That's kind of some of this reason we talked about the precursor to this in part 1 and laid the groundwork for that. But anyway, just to give you an idea, right? Okay. So in terms of the scenarios, let's actually spend some time going through the various scenarios, and we're going to start with BYOD scenario, right, where the user actually chooses to initiate the enrollment, to manually enroll their device. So this specific scenario, again, BYOD, personally owned device, the user wants to bring it under management. This is MDM enrollment. This is not necessarily an Azure AD join. There is a scenario for Azure AD join, and we'll talk about some of the details of that even here. But what we're going to describe here is purely not requiring the user to enroll in Azure AD in order to be managed. Now, as soon as I say that, if you don't enroll in Azure AD, then there's certain things you won't be able to use and leverage, right? But I just want to show this to you because it is an option. Whenever you use this method for enrollment, one of the things we talked about in part 1 is the whole idea of a personally owned device or a corporate owned device and some of the differences that can happen between. So in this specific scenario, when the user is enrolling their own device, then that device will show up as a personally owned device. The only exception will be if you redirect that to corporate owned by using a device identifier, like an IMEI number, etc., right? So let me go through actually enrolling the device, and we're going to spend much of our time here in demo. So let me go ahead and pull in a demo system, right? And I'm just going to log into it. So this is just a workgroup machine, right? I'm going to show you in settings in just a minute. There is no domain joined, either Azure AD or on-prem at this stage in this device. Okay, so go into the Settings app, go to Accounts, and Access Worker School. So this is where you would see that the device is joined to a domain, either Azure AD or on-prem AD, or MDM enrolled, right? So we're just going to go through settings here and enroll the device. So let me go Connect. And notice the option down here, join this device to Azure Active Directory. I am not going to choose this. Instead, I'm just going to supply my credentials so I can join in. Okay, click Next, and then we'll get prompted for our password. And let the process work, and should get a message here in a minute that we're all set and good to go. All right. And we're done, right? So that means that I have successfully enrolled. I see that status here, right? So let me go ahead and pull this machine out of the mix and go look actually in Intune and see how this is represented currently. So let me pull in the Intune environment, or Azure environment, so to speak. Open up Intune. All right, and if I go down to devices now, I should see that device. Let me look at under all devices. So I do see it, LabServe 10-2. Now, a word about this real quick, right? So the speed worked out in my favor here, right? Because the name of the device that I did in fact register is LabServe 10-2. No problem. So I can pull that back in. I'll just go to the command prompt and show you that is the name, the computer name, LabServe 10-2. But that is, there may be sometimes a little bit of a delay getting the name in here. It should be really quick, right, to reflect the actual name of the PC. But sometimes there will be maybe an intermediate kind of name. So if I go to the properties on this device, for example, and look, there's the management name. And so in the console initially, this might be the name that's reflected until the detail fully loads in. Anyway, not to belabor that point, but just to call it out. Okay, another thing that I can show you here, notice the ownership. This is a personally owned device, right? And we see this in Intune. So this is the Intune representation of the devices that are managed by Intune, right? Well, I talked about that really all the devices and all of the users that are reflected here are really stored in Azure AD. So it's interesting sometimes to go look at Azure AD and see those devices. So there's a really convenient node here to go to Azure AD and see those devices. Now, I could just as easily go down here and look at the devices view. It's the same view, but it's just a nice convenience here, right? So let's go look at that device in Azure AD. And so we see a bit more busyness, if you will. So I'm going to go clear some of the columns to just get the ones that I care about. So I don't care about these per se. I don't care about the owner. This doesn't really matter either. So, okay, cool. So let's go ahead and spread some of these out just to give us bigger things to look at. All right, so I can tell that this one is actually my machine. It was joined today. And here's the name. And notice the join type, Azure AD registered. Right? So in order for the device to be managed by Intune, it has to be known or registered in Azure AD. There's another type of status for Azure AD, which is Azure AD joined. We did not join this device to Azure AD, which is why we don't see Azure AD joined here. You'll see an example of Azure AD joined in a moment. So what if you enroll the device in MDM and then later decide, hey, I really would like to go get this device joined to Azure AD, right? Well, can I do that after the fact? And the answer is, yeah, you can. It's really better if you know you're going to join to Azure AD to go ahead and do that up front. There's reasons that that's better, but let me go ahead and show you this just in case, right? So if I go into my device that I just joined, so I have this status. It is joined. If I want to go join this to Azure AD, then all I have to do is click Connect, and here's this join the device to Azure AD. And I can select this. I just put in my credentials again. All right, and my password. And notice it is going to look like it's going to succeed, and then it should fail miserably. All right, I'm going to join it. And so hopefully I will get an error. Yeah, something went wrong. Right? Well, what in the world went wrong? Why can't I join my device to Azure AD? It's already MDM enrolled. Why can't I do Azure AD as well? And I will show you quickly why you're getting this particular error. So if I pull back up Azure and go to Azure Active Directory, one of the things that I've configured for this, and we'll come back to this in a minute, is the ability to automatically join my device to MDM whenever I join Azure Active Directory, right? So if I go into this, notice I'm telling every user that joins the device to Azure Active Directory to also enroll in Intune. The problem here is that my device is already enrolled in Intune. So whenever the Azure AD join happens and we try to then also enroll in Intune, it doesn't work, right? So to quickly show you that, I'm going to go ahead and change it so that no users are allowed to automatically enroll in Intune, and then we'll go through this process again. If I can type. Man, having a hard time with my typing skills today. All right, and so we'll go through the same process, and this time whenever I select join, it should go through no problem. All right. Something still went wrong. Let's try it one more time and make sure. With all those misspellings, who knows? Okay. try it one more time. Sign in. All right. Goes through the process. Join. All of that looks like it's typed correctly. Hopefully it will work this time. Still getting that same error. That's interesting. The device is already enrolled. That's the error. It shouldn't be trying to enroll again. So that's just probably a timing thing on the Azure backend. But you get the idea, right? And that is the issue here. If you already have it enrolled and you try to Azure AD join it, it's going to result in something like this. If that Azure AD join is also configured to MDM join. Anyway, belaboring the point there, let me go ahead and pull this back out. And I am going to go configure my Azure AD to domain to MDM enroll in a minute, but just wanted to show you that, right? Another comment. So I mentioned before that if you enroll a device manually like this, that the resulting device ownership will be personally owned device. The exception to that being if you choose to place a corporate identifier for that device, IMEI for Windows devices, into a list of known identifiers, then we'll translate that to be a corporate-owned device. The challenge with IMEI, it only works on devices that actually have a cellular stack, right? So again, just information to factor in. Okay, let's do the next one. So this would be an automatic enrollment. The user still initiates it, and so this is kind of a double hop enrollment. And so the scenario here specifically would be devices that are corporate owned. Now, it doesn't have to be a corporate owned device, but you typically think of it that way, right? The MDM enrollment is going to happen in a two-step way. So the first thing you're going to do, the only thing you're going to do as the user, is join the device to Azure Active Directory. And then Azure Active Directory, when that join happens, there's further configuration that you've already seen that will tell Azure, go ahead now as step 2 and MDM enroll that device, right? Now the interesting thing here is when I've done that in testing, I was looking to find out, okay, if I use this scenario and Azure AD enroll the device, but not directly MDM enroll the device, letting Azure AD join do that for me, will the device show up as a corporate-owned device or a personally owned device? And the answer is neither. At least in all the testing I've done, it shows up as an unknown device in terms of ownership, right? That surprised me a little bit, but it maybe makes a little bit of sense because maybe we just don't know. You know, we can't guarantee that it's a personally owned device because of the way it was enrolled through Azure AD. We can't also guarantee it's corporate owned. That's just speculation on my part, but maybe that's why it's unknown. Don't know, but you'll see that is how it rolls here in just a minute. So to show this, let me pull in another machine that I haven't enrolled yet and bring it in. Okay. So just as before, we're going to go into settings. Actually, before I even get in there, I need to make sure my Azure AD is configured correctly, because right now it's not configured to automatically join anyone, because I turned that off. And let me save that again, make sure that it's turned on, so we should be good at this stage, right? Oh, and by the way, while I'm here, you know, this is certainly we're talking about in these contexts Intune, right? But this ability to automatically join a device for MDM management is not unique to Intune. Basically, the way it works is under Mobility, MDM, and MAM, you add an application, and that application will have the settings that will redirect for MDM enrollment, MAM enrollment, whatever as needed. I use Intune, but there are other options here, such as Well, here's Intune. Then there's Mobile Iron and AirWatch and others that you could choose if you want to, but I'm using Intune, right? With all that said, and to hopefully give Azure time to process that so this works the way I expect it to, right? So I'm going to go back in here, Access Worker School. I am not connected to anyone right now, so I am going to connect. The difference is I'm not going to supply credentials up here like I did before. Instead, I'm going to go join this device to Azure Active Directory. Okay, and supply my password. Now this one, see if we catch the timing right. This one is LabServe 10-4. So let me go ahead and join in or sign in, and then I will be asked to join. Hopefully we'll join without a problem. Join. And once we get the all set message, which should be up any moment now, I'll pull back in Azure. Yeah, all set. So that quickly, let's go to Azure again and Intune and devices, and see if we see LabServe 10-4. And it hasn't shown up here yet, so that's good. We're just kind of waiting for a minute. See if it shows up. And there it is. Notice the name, right? I mentioned that there's kind of a little bit of a slight delay that will first present one name and then it'll shift. So the name we're looking for is LabServe 10-2. If I go into Azure AD devices, I probably already have it. In fact, I do already have the right name, right? So I'm going to go get rid of these, get rid of owner, don't care about all this, apply, right? So if I just expand these over, right? So, and then the name. So here's 10-4. Notice the join type is Azure AD joined, not registered. Because here, again, I just enrolled in MDM. I didn't enroll in Azure AD. Here, I enrolled in Azure AD. Azure AD enrolled me in Intune because of that configuration. So I am truly Azure AD joined here, right? This is also a unknown ownership status. So I've left this for probably 24 to 28 hours, something like that, and it stayed unknown. Kind of surprised me, but I also can kind of maybe make some justification as to why that's the case. But interesting, nonetheless. Oh, and also we're on all devices, and the name switched just that quickly to LabServe 10-4. So in fact, it is the right one. I'll refresh this again just to make sure unknown is still there. It is, right? And so that's just kind of an anomaly about that particular join type, right? Okay, so this is joined. So I'll go ahead and close this out. And now notice the difference. So let me move off this node and move back onto the node, right? Connected to Tailspin Toys Azure AD. Let me contrast that with the way it appears on 2. This is the first one we did. This is their worker school account. So that's how you can notate the difference. This is strictly MDM joined, while this one is Azure AD joined and also MDM joined. I'll show you how you can tell that here in just a minute. Right. Okay, so let's move on to the next one. So bulk enrollment. This one's an interesting scenario to me. Kind of goes a little bit of a different pathway. So in this scenario, the device that we're going to enroll is a corporate-owned device, right? The enrollment here is going to be done not by any user of that device, but by applying a provisioning package to the device. When the provisioning package loads onto the device, it will enroll the device in Azure AD. That enrollment in Azure AD will also cause the device to be enrolled in Intune, right? And so the status of that will be a corporate-owned device. So another way to say it, whenever you use a provisioning package to bulk enroll a device, that will cause the device to show up as corporate-owned. So for this, we need to create the provisioning package, right? And so if the phrase provisioning package is not familiar to you, this is a particular way that we can configure a whole slew of settings on uniquely Windows 10 devices using a tool called the Windows Imaging and Configuration Designer. Actually, I think we shortened it to just the Imaging Configuration Designer these days. So there's a couple of different ways that you can obtain the Imaging Configuration Designer. The first is through the Microsoft Store, right? And this is probably the quickest and easiest way to obtain the tool. Let's see, search for configuration. Okay, there. Windows Configuration Designer. Now, I already have this on my device. Essentially, this is a standalone tool that you can load separately, right? I've got it, right? No problem there. So I'll go ahead and launch this on my device. Launching it on another screen, stand by. There it is. So you'll see it pop up. Oops, that actually was a link to my store again. Apologies, let me go launch it. Let's see. All right, so launched it. Here it is on the tool, or on my desktop. Now, this is one way. The other way is if you have Configuration Manager in your environment, one of the requirements in Configuration Manager is that you have the Windows ADK installed. Now, so the Configuration Designer is part of the Windows ADK. It is not required that you load the Configuration Designer for Config Manager, so you may not actually have it loaded. But if you do, then it's on your Configuration Manager server, or you can just download the Windows ADK and load the Configuration Designer from there. Whichever option you choose is fine, but it's going to be the same tool. So what we want to do is work through the Configuration Designer so that we have a provisioning package at the end that will facilitate our device, our Windows 10 device, joining Azure AD, and as a result of joining Azure AD, will become enrolled in Intune. The challenge is there's really no way to do that without the wizards that you see, right? Because one of the things we'll have to do, as you'll see in just a minute, is retrieve the Azure AD token unique to the Azure AD instance that I own, right? So there's a few wizards here that I can choose. So your eyes may fall to the Provisioning Windows Mobile Devices wizard. I've tried to use this a couple of times, and I may have used it incorrectly. It's been a while, but that one never really seemed to work for me, right? This is the one that I use for doing this today. So we're just going to start with this wizard and answer a few questions. So I'm just going to let the defaults work here, and the wizard pops up. And there's a number of questions you have to answer. This one you have to answer, otherwise the wizard won't complete. So I'm just going to call this test. Now, I don't care at all for the device to be named according to what I'm putting in this wizard. So I'm going to have to edit this out before I can use the provisioning package the way I want to. But I have to answer this question in the wizard, otherwise I can't complete the wizard, right? So I've got this one done. Set up network again. I don't care at all about setting up the network. I'm just going to turn it off. Account management. Here's where I do care. Notice this one, enroll in Azure AD. So what I'm going to need to do is get my bulk token. And notice the expiration time. This only allows you a 30-day or month time frame. Notice that I'm doing this on May 31st. And I have July 1st as my expiration time, so whatever that works out to days-wise. So I'm going to go get the bulk token, and what that's going to require me to do is sign in to Azure. Okay, seen me do this a few times already. And no, I don't care about adding it to Windows. Doesn't matter to me. You might, I don't, for what I'm doing here. Retrieving the bulk token, Bulk token fetched successfully, so I'm good. I don't need any other configurations here. I don't want to add any applications. I don't care to add any certificates, and I'm going to click Finish. Now, I don't also want to create the package, right? Because if I create the package, it's going to take all of these configurations, and that's what the package will consist of. I've already mentioned I don't want the device name to be set to anything because I'm very happy with the device names that I already have. So instead of clicking Create, I'm going to switch to the Advanced Editor. And yes, it's going to warn me I can't come back to the wizard, so I'm going to say fine, no problem. And then navigating this, there's a ton of settings over here, and you can just see the upper level categories over here. So trying to find those that I need to edit, for me initially was a bit of a pain until I realized that on the right are all of the different settings that I have configured, right? So I can look through these. I actually know what I care about as a result. So I know that the only one I care about is stuff contained under accounts. So I'm going to get rid of all of the configurations under UBI. So under UBI, it's desktop, and then hide UBI. So I need to go find UBI, and then desktop. And then, yes, hide UBI is configured. You can tell because it's bolded. And now I just want to say, no, I don't care. Just don't configure that. So it takes it away. Same thing under policies, application management. So let's go down to policies, application management. And here's the one that was configured. I don't care about that at all. So I will also tell it not configured. Right? That leaves me only with accounts. And so if I go to accounts, you'll see I have Azure. I have several, but I have Azure. And these two are bolded. These are the two that I configured. First is a URL that lets me get into the Azure environment. The second is basically the bulk token detail. That is an encrypted long string of detail. So with that, that's all I need. Right? So now that I've got this, I'm ready to export the package, and I can export my provisioning package. I can call it whatever I want up here. Click Next. And then I can encrypt it and sign it if I want to. I don't care to. Here's the output path. I can browse to whatever I need to. I already got this saved, and so I'm just going to use it from that saved location. Right? So I'm going to go ahead and cancel this, and good to go. Don't really need this anymore, right? So let me pull in the VM that I want to now provision. So you'll see that I've copied the provisioning package to it. I called it Join Azure Active Directory. Now there's a couple of ways that I can install this. For testing, I just double click on it and it goes and installs, right? No problem. For production usage in bulk, you may want to automate the installation of this. Now there's a number of different ways you could automate this, right? One is just simply to use a script, as you'll see in a minute, right? But let me just start by running this. So this one, just to show you, this is LabServe 10. Actually, I haven't renamed this one yet. Okay, that's fine. So this is desktop 4K09L65. This is just one of the default names, so we'll keep our eye on that in just a minute. Right? So I'm going to go double click on this, join it to Azure AD. Yes, I want to go ahead and run it, and yes, I trust it, so I'm going to add it. And so it'll take just a few seconds here working in the background, and if this works successfully, which I expect it to, it's going to pop up a screen that my machine is going to restart in a minute, etc. Right? But it's going in provisioning my system right now to be loaded, and hopefully we'll be able to see this in Azure in just a minute. Now, there's other ways that I could, in fact, provision this. So I'll just go load PowerShell, run it as administrator, and so I can just easily script this and use the commandlet to install provisioning package, and then I would need to use package path and fill out the path to that ppkg file that I just double clicked on, And there's also the option to force. Now, if I use force, that means be completely silent. Don't ask for any confirmation. Just go do it, right? Whereas if I don't use force, it's going to actually ask for confirmation, etc. Right? So, again, whichever way you would like to do it would be fine, and whichever way you want to cause that automation to work is fine, right? There's, again, multiple ways that you could, in fact, do that. So let's just check. I would have thought that it would have popped up by now, but let's just check and see if I notice any progress in here. So if I go to accounts, oh, there we go, about to be signed out, just like I was hoping for. So that's actually happened. I don't see anything here yet, but I'm going to go ahead and let this thing process. Let me pull in Intune and see if it has any indicators of this device in it yet. So I'll refresh. Not quite yet. Let's look at Azure AD. Anything there? Not quite yet there either. So anyway, we'll keep letting that process and so forth, and see what we can see. Looks like the device is probably back from a reboot, so let's just go check on it directly. Yeah, okay, here we go. So this is the one that I joined. Let's check back in on the progress. So back to accounts and access worker school. And we have it now, right? So we did, in fact, get this thing joined to Azure AD. Now notice this. In previous attempts, it was the user that actually did the join. Here it wasn't the user. It was this package that has a unique GUID, Charlie Foxtrot or Charlie 1158, whatever, right? The ID. So arguably, the package ID, in this case, could be considered kind of the username, right? But we know that this is connected. Now that we see this, let's go back into the console and see if we see that, right? So let me kind of go to all devices again. And should be percolating along because it did actually join. Let's see there. So we do see test. Now that's an unfortunate name, so it looks like that didn't totally get worked out of the package, but either way, it's here. And then it should show up over here. So it's now here as well. So that's just me probably making a mistake on that and leaving the name to be test because I don't care for that to be the computer name. In fact, I'm sure that it did change the computer name to test when I didn't want it to. Let me just look and see. Yeah, so that was my bad. But definitely the provisioning package can be crafted without causing it to change the name. It's just I must have left something in there and or didn't save it right or whatever, right? But it's there. Now the other thing is in Azure AD, if we go look at our list of users, we will actually see that package with its ID. Here are a couple of them from different iterations, right? So, in fact, whenever I was first doing this, it kind of threw me. I'm like, why do I keep seeing these usernames with package and so forth in Azure AD? And I'm kind of a nerd about trying to keep Azure AD clean. And since this is just for demo and I don't really care, I'm going to delete that. I can go back. All right, so that's running through and using the bulk enrollment method. Now, the last one that we'll talk about is one that we've talked about in previous sessions, and so I'm not really going to jump into the detail of it here so much, because that previous session was kind of on its own, except to say that let me show you this before I completely go in. Let me pull back in Azure and go back into Intune. So the goal, or I mentioned that the target state for enrolling this device called test was that it would be corporate owned. It is. This one is the one that was in unknown. It's still unknown. So that one, again, to me is a little bit odd, but nevertheless, there we go, right? Okay. So Autopilot is the scenario where the user doesn't really interact with this. The only thing the user does is powers on the device. And in that session with Autopilot, we talked all through how we would go about getting the Autopilot details or the details from the device into the Autopilot service, and that the OEM has a channel, and that if you have your own on-prem devices that you want to put in Autopilot, there's a channel for that, and detail that process. I will show you Autopilot for a couple of reasons. One is I want to use this opportunity to show you something that just showed up in the Autopilot service. Right, one of the challenges, I guess, is that until now, there really was not a way for the user to know provisioning is continuing to happen on their device, right? They don't really have a visual cue when provisioning is complete. Well, now that has been added. It's a feature that's in preview mode. I'll show you how to set it up in a minute. And I also want to leverage the auto-piloted device to show you a couple of more details, right? So, but basically the process, the device is turned on, it checks in with the Autopilot service. Generally, well, so there's some changes there too, right, which we'll go through, and then figures out its configuration, and then we'll go complete the out-of-box experience. The user will sign into the device with their provided credentials, which gets them Azure AD enrolled, and then because Azure AD is configured to MDM enroll, gets them enrolled in MDM, and then the configurations start to come down through, in this case, Intune, right? Now let's back up just for a minute, right? So a couple of just interesting changes along the way in Autopilot. I'm going to pull in a machine that is ready for Autopilot, and part of this is new. Part of this is new to me because I didn't realize it, right? But one of the things, and pardon me as I geek out just for a minute, on this, but it helps illustrate the changes. So what you see is Windows 10 1803. And this is a change unique to 1803. So if you were in previous versions of Windows 10 and you were sitting at this screen and maybe your device was plugged in with an Ethernet connection, meaning it had access to a network, that's fine, because at this screen we had not yet checked to see if the device was registered in Autopilot and pull down the configuration. That was really interesting and kind of unique to demo scenarios, because what could be done at this stage is that the person doing the demo could simply press Shift F10, pop up the command prompt, go into PowerShell and like so, and install the PowerShell script that's needed in order to grab the hash and so on. So I can go in here, set execution policy, unrestricted, right, go through all that, no problem, right? And then I could go through the process to acquire the script that I need for pulling the hardware hash kind of on the fly. So if I remember how to do this, in PowerShell, there's a command that you can use, install script, get Windows Autopilot info. Does that work? Okay, good, it did. So yes, and I'll have to answer the prompt a couple of times here just to make sure. Yes, and then one more, and we should be good. All right, so it's going to get it. And one more time. Actually, let's do all. There we go. And it finishes up. So now, in my environment, I actually have this script. So I can run it. You're going to see it's going to produce the hash, and I'm good. Now I can then save this to a CSV. Point is, at this stage, prior to 1803, Windows 10 had not yet communicated with the Autopilot service, so it gives me this unique window to be able to go in, grab the hash, load it up into the Autopilot service, and then continue with the demo. Here, with 1803, the system has already communicated with Autopilot. So the point is, if I don't have that hash info already loaded up into Autopilot, I've already missed the boat, because this is, in my case, a virtual machine, has an Ethernet connection And so it does have the ability to go to the network. Now, if it is a device that doesn't have an Ethernet connection, you have to connect to wireless. There's other provisions for that. Just interesting information, right? But since mine is already provisioned, it should be good. So I'm going to go ahead and click through and say yes, right? It's going to go through the process of getting some different things. Now, let me, actually before I complete this process, I want to show you one thing as well. So again, the other thing I just want to use this opportunity to show you is the progress indicator that we have made available for you in the process now. So Autopilot itself is not a process that requires Intune. It can be used with other NDM providers that support Autopilot. You can tell that I have talked to my environment. I'm Tailspin Toys, so this is ready to go in terms of Autopilot. But before I proceed, let me go back to the Intune console. So now, in Intune, we've added a preview feature under device enrollment for Windows devices specifically called Enrollment Status Page, right? And all this does, when you configure it, and I've got it configured, it allows you to set two choices, right? The first choice is, do I want to show progress in status at all? Yes. By default, it's no. And do I want to block the device until all apps have completely configured? So the scenario kind of unfolds like this. There are certain configurations that are more time-consuming on a device, but are required by corporate IT in order for that device to be deemed ready, right? So prior to this feature being made available, there was no process by which you could prevent the user from using the device until it was totally provisioned. And what that would lead to, take the case of BitLocker. The BitLocker provisioning process is required by many organizations, but it takes time, right? And so people would get their device, they start to use their device, they'd realize they can't get to corporate mail because BitLocker's not provisioned yet, and conditional access fails, et cetera, and that would generate help desk calls. Why can't I get to my device? Now, with this piece in place, you can show that user visual cues as to why they're not getting into the device until it's ready. So that said, let's go ahead and go forward. All right, and apply the password, and you should see pretty quick here the first phase of that visual indicator popping up, right, to show that provisioning is actually in process, kind of where we are in that provisioning process, and so forth. And again, this is in preview mode. It may well change before it's ready, but here's that status indicator, setting your device up for work. So device preparation, that's complete. Got a green check mark. Here's what we did, right? Here's what we're working on now, device setup, showing details, setting up security policies and apps and all of those things that might be necessary. Have not got to this part yet, right? And so here, in just a minute, we'll actually shift out of this, and you'll see that the status indicator will come right back after, it'll persist through a reboot if it needs to. Actually, have I ever actually seen it in a reboot? I don't remember right now, but you'll see that screen come up. Hi, welcome to Windows 10, and then the user signs in again if they want to, and this status bar or status experience will come right back up. Right. So this is really cool. I've allowed the user to be able to continue to their desktop if they want to, right? And so they could bypass all of this and so forth, but I'm not going to do that. And so now we're going through this part of it, and you'll see the experience. Hi, on we go, and kind of normal stuff now for the Windows 10 setup. So we'll let this process here for just a minute, and I'll then see what happens after. Right, so I'm going to go ahead and actually pause this so you don't have to watch this whole thing, but then whenever it comes time, I'll restart it so we can see it happen. Okay, almost there. So now I'm reconnecting, right? Let me maximize this again. And so it should come up to the login screen, right? Please wait. And now I'm at the login screen. So the user thinks, okay, great, I'm good. Now I'm going to log in with my credentials, and off we go, right? And I should, depending on timing, I may, yeah, here's the status screen again, right? So it comes right back. And so this kind of is always available for the user to see until we know things are done. So now we're doing the account setup and security policies and other kinds of things that might need to happen, right? So anyway, going to let this proceed in the background because we'll come back to this machine here in just a little bit, but thought that was interesting and wanted to show it to you as we talked about Autopilot. Again, refer back to the other Autopilot session we did. That one was in the discussion around Configuration Manager in the Microsoft Cloud. Did a whole discussion on Autopilot related to that, so that's where you can find that one if of interest. So those are the 4 scenarios. So now the question, hey, great, we've done this enrollment. I've seen how you do all the enrollment. Now what can I do with the enrolled device? I'm the user. I have my device. It's enrolled. And do I have any ability to kind of understand what that enrollment has gotten me or how to interact with that enrollment, etc.? There's really a couple of things that should be known. The user, some of it, administrators, for sure. The first is under settings, and I kind of talk about this with interacting with and understanding the MDM managed settings. So for this, I'm going to pull back in my device that is in the process of provisioning, and I'm just going to go ahead and skip to the desktop because I want to at this stage, right? And so now that I'm here at the desktop, I can go in and show you some of the other details. And what I'm going to show you here, you can see in all of the other ways that I've done enrollment, right? This is just using the Autopilot experience to kind of uniquely show it to you. If I can get this to come up. It is actively provisioning, so it is a little bit busy at the moment, but here comes settings, so that's cool. All right, so now that I have settings, I'm going to go back to accounts and access worker school, and this is definitely enrolled. I'm connected to Azure Active Directory. I use the credentials that I used to sign on whenever I was in Autopilot. And so I mentioned kind of building. Again, there's MDM enrollment by itself. There's Azure AD, joining Azure AD, which causes MDM enrollment if you have that set. And then there's the provisioning package. And then there's Autopilot, all of which have this area that you can kind of look at. So how do I actually know that my machine is MDM provisioned? Well, if I click on this, if this machine were just Azure AD joined, the only option I would have is disconnect. But since this device is also MDM enrolled, I have the ability to select additional info. And there's a few things that are interesting here. First, you can always tell whether the device has been synchronized recently, right? And in some cases, if you're an administrator or even a user, you might want to synchronize the device manually, right? So you can go do that here. Typically, you don't need to, right? In an MDM managed world, typically, as soon as you configure a setting for the device and assign it to that device or user, then the device will be notified to go check in right away. How that happens, we'll get to in a minute. But if you need to, if you want to check in manually, you can do that here. Another thing that's available is to see the areas that are managed by your particular MDM solution. So you can look right here as the user and as the administrator and see, I know that these types of policy settings are coming down. I see these applications that are coming down from my MDM management solution, Intune in this case. And in my case, this will continue devices ready. There you go, right? So should be good. Get that notification. So in my case, this list will expand a little bit as we go. In fact, let me see if that changed yet. Let me go back into info. Let me just actually refresh settings because I'm just curious if it did add in any additional pieces. Okay, so it hadn't updated yet, but other things are in process. So I know that Office 365 is going to load here, Rich Copy is going to load here, but this is the status so far, the different policies and applications that have been put in place. And then also, if we scroll down, Advanced Diagnostics Report. So this is really nice to be able to have the help desk interact with the user. I can go create the report, export it out. It's going to open up the location. It's just an HTML doc, so if I double click on it, it'll pull up a very nice MDM Diagnostics Info report that can be very useful. All right, so big major categories, device info, connection info, device management account, the certs that are in place, any enrolled configuration resources and sources and so on, the different configuration pieces that are actually being brought to bear. These are different things that are currently in the status of provisioning. Managed policies, different things that are on the device, etc. Scroll on down past this. Let me grab on the right. Applications, sorry, unmanaged policies, block policies. You know, on we go. And I'm looking for one other section here. I think it's here. Maybe it's not. Nope, I guess it's not. I was looking for applications. But either way, you see a really nice list of things, and then you can get a full list of the Windows 10 CSP policies that you might want to reference here. So it's a really nice, nice diagram. Now, the other thing that sometimes comes up, right, is, especially when we're talking about this and you start to see the MDM settings come down, a question I've heard a couple of times is, okay, great, so we see the MDM stuff coming down, but if you compare and contrast MDM-based settings and GPO-based settings, which one is preferred? Right? Well, if you really get into that, really not the focus of what we're talking about here, but it's worth chatting about for a minute. GPO settings are defined for the domain. Right now, yeah, you do have local GPO settings or policy settings, local policy settings on devices. But if you have a device that's domain joined, the domain policies are going to win. If you have a workgroup device, then managing the policies on that device kind of is not the easiest thing in the world. But if you have an MDM device, it doesn't really matter whether that device is domain joined or just workgroup joined. You can manage MDM through Intune or your MDM management solution all day long, regardless. And so just from that perspective alone, and knowing that we're getting more and more devices that are not necessarily domain joined, but we need to manage those in IT, MDM is definitely taking the focus, because that's a great channel to be able to manage regardless of the way domain membership has been assigned. Right? And to that end, you know, there is a difference in the way devices will implement settings. In other words, if you configure a setting through GPO and then go try to look in the registry of that device to track that GPO setting, in the typical places, you'll find that. But if you set a similar setting with MDM and then go try to look in the traditional locations in the registry to confirm that setting, you're going to become frustrated because it's not the same. There's a separate location in the registry that will indicate those settings that have been put in place by MDM, right? So let's pop open the registry here for a minute. And then just go down, quick view, local machine, software, Microsoft policy. Policy manager, and then current. So default are all the default settings. Current are those that are on the device right now, and then device settings. So you can see all of these are settings that have been implemented through MDM for this device. Well, let's go back to settings. See if anything's changed, first of all. Go back to accounts, and then access worker school, and here, and info, right? So we see indeed, hey, we've got rich copy. These others have been added. If we kind of look, delivery optimization here, not a one-for-one exactly. There's some system stuff and some settings stuff and device lock and different things, right? So you clearly see that this is coming down, and then you can go look at the various settings as they are. So a really good way to be able to see what's going on, right? Okay, let's pull that away for a minute. Another thing that's really important here is this thing called the Windows Notification Service. So let me explain this for a minute. So I told you a second ago that if you go into Intune and configure a setting and assign that to devices, that those devices should learn about that settings change right away. It should not require a manual check-in or sync. It also shouldn't require waiting for that device to go on its scheduled sync, which can be hours in the future, right? The way this works is whenever you have a device that is enrolled in MDM, it will create what's called a Windows Notification Service channel. Essentially, it's a persistent connection between the managed device and a bunch of servers in the Microsoft data center called Windows Notification servers. So whenever you go and you have your cloud service, in this case Intune, that makes a configuration change, Intune will immediately go over to Windows Notification Service and say, hey, I've made some changes to these devices. Windows Notification Service knows who those devices are and will immediately send a notification to those devices to say, hey, something's changed, you better go check in, right? And that's how it all works. So to kind of explain this a little bit more, there was a situation, I was in a discussion with a customer, and they were saying, hey, I need a way to be able to, from the Intune console, be able to automatically force my managed devices to, Windows devices to check in. But I don't see it for Windows devices. Why not? Right? And I asked the same question to myself. Well, that's odd. Why not? And then I realized it's because you don't have to do anything, right, to Windows devices to cause them to check in. They will check in just through the Windows notifications. I'll give you a visual kind of indicator of that. So if I go back into Intune, one of the things that this customer is trying to do is to go to their devices. So I have an iPad here. So it was customary for them to maybe click on their iPad, come up here and say more, and say, okay, fine. Let's see, where is the option? Oops. Sync, right? Force a sync. Because you can clearly do that with iPad. But then they would go to their Windows device. So here's a Windows device. And they would want to do the same thing. And at the time, we did not have this option. We do now, right? And so I was kind of bamboozled why we wouldn't do that for Windows devices, but why we would for iPad and so forth. And now we have it, but then it's when I really dug in and figured out that really that's not necessary for a configuration, for you to have to manually trigger the device. The configuration change does that through Windows notification. Now, glad that we have that now, because there are certain situations where you might in bulk want to cause the device to synchronize, and you can do that now from the console, so it's all good, but just to illustrate, right? Okay. More information about this down here at this link, but there's also ways, question sometimes comes up, okay, how do I figure out that my device is actually configured with the Windows Notification Service? Is there anything I need to do? Well, first answer, no, there's nothing you need to do. Second, I'll show you now, or in just a second, how you would go about figuring that out. Okay, so we've spent a lot of time on enrollment, right? What about the company portal? So in part one of this, I mentioned that on Windows devices specifically, there is no need for the company portal in order to facilitate enrollment, right? You have not seen me use the company portal at all in this discussion so far related to enrollment. So no requirement for the company portal on Windows devices for enrollment. The company portal is required if you're going to do any kind of user-focused management. So that's the compare-contrast, right? Company portal, user-focused management, not for enrollment, right? That's not true for iOS and Android, right? So we'll talk about those options when we get there for iOS and Android. So what about troubleshooting? Specifically two big categories: enrollment troubleshooting, Windows notification channel troubleshooting. So definitely some good things that you can bring to bear for troubleshooting those processes, and there's a whole lot more discussion around troubleshooting that we can have and will whenever we get to things like software deployment, policy deployment, things of that nature, right? But specifically honing in on these two, just quickly want to show you back on this device that we've brought in. Let me pop back into the registry. So back in the registry, there's actually, so for those coming from a config manager world, we're accustomed to seeing logs and having an abundance of detail in the logs, and that's really good and useful and helpful. Intune and MDM have their own ways of representing data, and it's just as useful, right? So following the path down, specifically for enrollment, right? So if I go to local machine and then software and then Microsoft, and I scroll down, you will see two keys. One is called enrollment and one is called enrollments, plural. The one that is most useful is the plural, but you can kind of expand this and see different settings and so on that may or may not, help you depending. Under enrollments, we have a lot of detail, and the biggest problem with enrollments sometimes is finding where we need to be, right? So if I scroll down, there's going to be sub-key information that's useful. So the one I'm looking for, this one is not the one I'm looking for. Anything like alert listener for enrollment context and such, not really all that interesting for this discussion. Here's another one. So just keep scrolling down, keep scrolling down. Sometimes you get lucky and it's first. Haven't gotten there yet. Okay, keep going. And it probably, Murphy's Law will be the last one that I get to. There, not the last one, but close to the last. Right, so we have a GUID here. And this GUID reflects certain detail about enrollment that can be very useful, such as the Azure AD resource ID that is being used. The discovery service that's being used for enrollment. Let me expand this out a bit. Whether the system is federated, the type of enrollment, the enrollment state. On we go. The renewal period, renewal error code, if any. Renew status, the timestamp, UPN for who actually enrolled this device. So that was me as I logged into Autopilot. Root certificate thumbprint, right? So a lot of good information just right here that is pertinent for the enrollment process. But there's other stuff as well. So there's the device management client, right? And so I can see different details about what server I'm connecting to and the name and different things. There's also my detail around my first synchronization and different detail, provisioning status, and so on. There's polling information, right? And then there's this one called push. So push is specifically there because of Windows Notification Service. And there's detail here, such as the channel URI, right? This is a very long notification channel URL. This changes over time. So once you have the notification channel, that doesn't mean it's the same notification channel forever. It will change. And so this is the time in which that channel will be expired. We'll need to renegotiate. Here's the last time it was renewed. Here's the status of 0. That's all healthy, right? So good to go. So just briefly, some detail about that. Yeah, and actually, before I completely zone out of that, let me pull back in my demo machine and show you one more thing in that note. So I showed you the registry, but there's also abilities in the event log. So let's go look at that. again, specifically focusing on enrollment. So that's going to be under applications and services. Logs takes a second for that to load. And then under that, when it loads, Microsoft, and then Windows. And then if we scroll down to device, diagnostics. My problem. Device management, that's what I'm looking for. Enterprise diagnostics provider. I was mixing words. Look at admin, then you'll see all sorts of event information here about enrollment. And you see a couple of things that pop through with errors and so on. So if you're having enrollment issues, definitely scour through the event log and see what it might tell you. Partnered with the registry information should be good stuff. So that's really it for the session today. A lot of information on enrollment. Enrollment's key to getting things started. So we will wrap this session here and continue with iOS in part 3.